Hello everyone, welcome to the new episode of the Compliance Playbook. A lot of times we are confused between the terms like policies, standards and controls, and most of us we also use it interchangeably without exactly knowing what does it mean. So in this video, I'm going to explain what does these terms mean with a simple example so that you exactly know what each term means and then you are no more confused. So let's get it started. So, before we begin, policy versus standard versus control, let's understand the exact problem. Why do we get it wrong? The first reason, because we come from the outside world and all these terms, they sound very much interchangeable, but actually they are not. Each of these terms, like policy, standard, control, they do different job. And if you use them loosely, you can get a lot of findings in audit, in fact, more questions in audit. So the mix-up has got real consequences. Like if you call out control as a policy in a security review, there's a chance that you will get an extra point or an extra question in audit, which no one wants. So the best way to solve this confusion is to look at all these terms as layers. So here are the layers. So if you speak to any organization of any scale, it could be an IT company or it could be an hospitality company. At the top, that's the framework. Framework decides the governance, the overall governance of the institution, of the organization. It sets the appetite, the risk appetite of the company, and it treats like an overall umbrella. Okay. So framework comes on the top, and then comes the policy. Now, there can be a policy for every department. There can be policy for the HR department, for information security, for technology, for a credit card department. There can be a policy specifically for the each department. What does policy do? Policy decides what we are required to do and why. Just the intent, nothing else. Policy is a very, very high level document. It just say what we are supposed to do. That's all. Then comes the standard. So everything that's written in the policy, standard helps us that what is the measurable and mandatory rule to do it. Okay. So policy decides what needs to be done. Standard makes it measurable. In procedure document, we write down who will do it, how we will do it, step by step. In fact, we can also call it SOP, the standard operating procedures. So procedure is a document that anyone can look at and exactly know that what is supposed to be done. And the last comes the controls. Controls are something, the safeguard, eventually something that can generate the evidence, like whatever policy we have kept, is it actually being implemented in the company or organization or not? So control comes at the last, which makes sure that there is some evidence that we can present, which auditors or external assessors can test or assess and can tell us, yes, that your organization has a good governance. So as we come from top to bottom, from framework to controls, frameworks, policy, they are most general. They just say, okay, where we are trying to move, what we are trying to do. That's our destination, that's our goal. But when we come down to the control, this very, very specific, that this exactly we need to do, this exactly we need to achieve, and this is how we will measure it, that if we have achieved it or we have not. So that's the top layer to bottom. If you start remembering it like this: framework, policy, standard, procedure, and then control. Let me explain this with a simple example. Let's assume we are talking about the CCTV camera. So, what would policy document will say? That we need to make sure that entrance and the sensitive areas are monitored for the security. Policy does not say anything else. It does not say use camera or use watchmen or use guards, nothing. It just says that sensitive areas must be monitored for the security. That's the policy. Now comes the standard. Now, standard is something that can be enforced. Okay, so standard says that there has to be cameras at all the entries. This is what is mentioned in standard, not in policy. Standard says the cameras need to be installed at all the entries and footage need to be kept for at least 90 days. Okay, this is what standard says. And now comes the procedures, that okay, who will review the footage, how to operate the camera, how to report the issues if there's anything wrong in the camera. That's the procedure, exactly SOP, standard operating procedure. who will do, when they will do, how they will do, everything. And last comes the control. Now, because we are talking about the camera which needs to operate, so control needs to make sure there is some evidence at the end of the day, end of the week, which auditors can see and decide that whatever was mentioned in policy is actually happening. So here control would be the camera has to be actively running, and there has to be some stored timestamp footage which can be used as evidence. So that was a very, very simple example of camera where policy does not mention anything about the camera. Policy just says that we need to monitor the sensitive areas for security, and then comes the standard, then comes the procedure, and then comes the control. Now let's take example of an information security world, which is incident. There can be a lot of security incidents in any organization, like there is data theft, or someone is trying to intrude the firewall. So the policy will say that every security incident must be detected, reported, and resolved promptly. That's all. Policy does not say anything else. Now comes the standard, which kinds of makes the thing mandatory on mandates that what needs to be done. So standard mandates that the security incidents need to be reported within 24 hours. That's the mandate. Okay. This is mentioned in standard. Now comes the procedure. Procedures is a standard operating procedure which would decide. So if there is any security incident, who to call, how to communicate, how to triage, how to bring people together, who, how, what, all these actions are documented in procedure. And last comes the control that will make sure that whatever has been mentioned in policy is there and enough evidence so that if auditor comes around, we can show it to the auditor or anyone who's trying to understand that the policy has actually been enforced. So here the control is there has to be an alerting system with a ticketed incident log with timestamps. So this control, this evidence will help an auditor, be it an external or be it an internal, to understand that whatever policy we created is being enforced very, very well. Okay. So I hope you could understand both the examples. Now, what are the biggest mistake people make when they're talking about the policies, standard controls, and procedures? The first thing is they will make policy document very, very detailed. You know, the step by step instructions and everything, but that's not the policy. That's the procedure. Policy has to be in high level intent, that what do you want to do? Where do you want to reach? What's your goal? That's all. Second mistake people do is that they buy a tool and they say this is a control. So for example, like I showed you example of a CCTV, buying a CCTV is not a control. It's just a tool. How do you make sure that the CCTV works? Is there any if enough evidence that it is working? That's the control. So control is something that when you enforce over it, okay? So buying a tool is not a control. Control is something that's an enforced setting, which we would say like, okay, is it working 24 hours? Are we getting logs? Are we getting timestamp images? Are we getting enough evidence that make sure it's working? That's the control. And the third confusion that people makes, they often confuse standard with a procedure. Standard is something measurable. When we say multi-factor authentication has to be there on the all admin accounts, that's the standard. Procedure is like how to get there. Procedure does not say something very, very measurable. Procedure just helps you that how do you achieve that. So these are often confusion that people make between policies, standard, controls, and procedures. So the final takeaway, if you look at the overall thing, policy sets the intent of the organization, sets the tone of the company. Standard makes it measurable. That if we have the policy, how do we measure that are we reaching there or not? And control, they do the actual work, that they provide us with the evidence at the end that whatever we are trying to enforce, wherever we are trying to reach, are we really reaching there or not? So if you get these three things straight, most of the confusion will be gone. Please let me know in comments if you like the video or if you have any specific question around these terms. I'll be more than happy to help you. See you in the next episode of the Compliance Playbook. Thank you very much.